Some of you may have experienced, at the beginning of this term, a cold or indisposition. It's at a time of year when everyone comes back from various places and they bring with them various bugs to which we are not all immune. Well, I have. And today I'm not feeling 100%. So if you see me like this every once in a while, it's because I am in need of a little support. I've been drinking my hot tea and sugar. But there's a little poem I composed about this as a form of excuse, and I wish to read it to you. At varying times, but most when term begins, the germs converge that ride on human skins. One reckless foe, strong in the unhealthful arts, invaded soon my system's weaker parts. You see me stand, or rather sit, now low, confused in mind, and with a wit made slow. Please pardon then this unpropitious time, and what is worse, this poor excuse in wretched rhyme. Your humble servant. Now today, we're going to take up the question of what is an argument in a composition. And I want to make a few remarks about it. The subject of your paper, the topic of your address, is not your argument. If someone asks you what you are writing about, you may give them an answer that is not what your actual argument is. I am writing about the midterm elections. Is that an argument? No. I am writing about what party X should do to win the midterm elections. Is that an argument? No. An argument would be something that is more specific and direct. So a subject matter or a topic does not constitute an actual argument. An argument is a case. Sometimes it helps to begin a sentence with, I argue that, or my argument here is. That's to put you on notice. Does that seem elementary? It may seem elementary. Does it help the reader? Indeed, it helps the reader. One rule mentioned in Corbett, and I think it's a pretty good rule, I've mentioned it I think once before, is that you should try, if you can, to express your argument in a single declarative sentence. Preferably a simple sentence, meaning not a long, compound, complex sentence with all kinds of dependent clauses and commas and semicolons. No. A simple, single, declarative sentence. What does declarative there mean?
It's not like a question or anything.
Yes, it's not a question. It's not an interrogative sentence. It's not an interjection. It's not a hortatory sentence. It is declarative. It's definite. It's clear. You're putting it forward. It doesn't need to be the first sentence of your composition, though it could be in some cases, but it should come early on. Moreover, why should you delay in telling your reader what your argument is? Now, some people say, I'm going to build up a case like Sherlock Holmes. I'm going to use evidence. I'm going to use induction from various parts of data. And then I'm going to use logical. And then near the end of the composition, I'm going to reveal what the argument is. I would say there's a risk in doing that. You lose your reader often in doing that, unless you are a master thriller writer. If you feel you can really keep the reader's attention and say, then we have this, and then we have that. But don't forget, not even Lincoln felt he could do that. He doesn't jump to the machinery part in the House Divided speech as the opening. No, he says a house divided against itself shall not stand. I believe the Union shall be either all slave or all free. That's right at the beginning. It's right at the beginning. Now, until you think that you are better than Lincoln at writing short addresses, I would suggest that you really try to put the argument early on in the composition. The poet, T.S. Eliot, wrote a very famous poem in the early 20th century, revolutionized modern poetry. It was called The Wasteland. And in it, he had a whole series of rhyming couplets, a little bit like the ones I read, only probably a little bit better. And his editor, Ezra Pound, wrote in the margin, "You can write couplets such as Alexander Pope did, but only if you can write better ones, dash, and you can't." Eliot cut out almost all of those lines. So until you think you can construct a speech better than Lincoln, or better than King, or better than Douglas, or better than Patrick Henry, follow a routine and master it, and then afterwards be bold enough to depart it. In other words, these organizational prompts, the knowledge of the elements of rhetoric, are quite time-tested. They go all the way back more than 2,000 years. There's no reason to feel that you should immediately jettison them. Try following them, and then, if you wish, vary. So if you find yourself writing, "I am going to compare," or "we can contrast," or "I want to suggest that," or "this essay will investigate," or "I will like to explore," or "we can look at," those are all introductions to the nether regions of composition, because they are not argumentative. They aren't. They let your reader only know what the topic or the subject is. That should be clear enough, usually from your argument itself. So as I express on the class outline, and I want to elaborate a little on this, the intellectual courage should be pre-tested, not tentatively and in progress. In other words, when you have completed a final version, you should be sure that that is what you want to say. You're no longer in the process of coming up. You may be refining your style a little, but the thought is a completed thought. A work of persuasion is not an experiment to see if you can formulate a persuasive argument. It is the presentation of one that you have formulated. And there's a real difference between this, because when we start to write a draft, what are we doing? We are writing a process of discovering how we ourselves can, in language, express an argument. And that process is imperfect. Can you think without language, or without some semiotic system? Have you ever tried it? Can you think without any signs, symbols, language, colors, notes, anyone? This is a difficult question. Philosophers have grappled with this. But if you're going to write, you've got to use language to think with. So as you draft a composition, if your language is muddled, confused, ambiguous, imprecise, repetitive, what does that say about your thinking? Your thinking is muddled, confused, ambiguous, and imprecise. It's hard. Are you the best judge of this? Well, probably not. Because what do we tend to do with our own work? I do. Don't you tend to think that your own work is pretty good? You don't want to say it's pretty bad, do you? But that's the tough part of writing, which is to say to yourself, all right, how good is it really? Writing is very often an act in which you must split yourself and imagine you are not yourself. You are some other individual who's looking at it. To change an image, the reader doesn't want to know how you got to the top of Memorial Church to get a view of Harvard Yard. If your idea is to tell them what the yard looks like, they want that view. Now, if you want to argue how hard it is to get up to the top of Memorial Church, that's another matter. But if you want to present them a view, give them the view, not the way you got there. When you write a draft, you are figuring out the way to get there. You're hacking that path through the undergrowth. You're finding out where the wrong trails are and where the right trails are. Most of the evidence of that needs to be banished from the final draft because it's not the route that is in the end established. That is why writing a draft, starting writing early, is really important. Anybody here writing a senior thesis or a junior paper this year? Right? You know, starting early on to write is important. Someone says, oh, I have to do all my research first. I have to find out absolutely everything about the topic first. Well, what happens if you set a course like that is, especially in a longer paper, but even in a shorter one, you are burdened down with many notes. You are burdened with many thoughts of other people. You even have trouble indexing them. And you have more or less snuffed out any particular originality that you might have had. Everything becomes quasi-derivative because you have saturated yourself in whatever other people have said about it. Doesn't mean you shouldn't do that reading, but it means every act of writing has to trust itself with its own originality enough to begin writing on its own. And you say, well, you know, Professor Engel, I tried that and I threw out 3 drafts. I'd say, good. Shows judgment. It shows judgment. No one in the English language ever wrote their best prose before the age of 30. Not that I can name. That's a shocking statement, but I think it's true. What that means is that writing really fine prose, your own prose, and improving it is such a process that it takes a number of years to reach the pinnacle that you can reach. Lots of efforts are made, this class, XPOS, many other areas. They're all a help, but none of them can take enough time to make you the best writer you can be. That's got to be your time. And it's got to extend over months, maybe years. You will notice that when some writers are younger, their style is one thing, and when they are older, their style is another thing. And generally speaking, that style gets better and better and more recognizable. Let me read a little section from the 18th century rhetorician Hugh Blair. Hugh Blair was read by Lincoln. Hugh Blair is praised in Gary Wills's book about the speech at Gettysburg that Lincoln gave as being one of the most important rhetoricians that Americans knew in the 19th century. Now, unfortunately, Wills doesn't say that Blair was a Scot. He leaves the impression he was an American. No, he wasn't. He was a Scot. It's just that he was read very avidly by various Americans, including Lincoln. For we may rest assured that whenever we express ourselves ill, there is, besides the mismanagement of language, for the most part, some mistake in our manner of conceiving the subject. Embarrassed, obscure, and feeble sentences are generally, if not always, the result of embarrassed, obscure, and feeble thought. Something I paraphrased earlier in this hour, but it's true. Psychologically speaking, when you write, 1,000 associations are going through your mind with every word or sentence you write. That is to say, there's a whole machinery of thought behind your compositional process. Does your reader share any of those associations? Well, maybe some, but certainly not your unique set. So therefore, even though you are at first satisfied with what you think is a clear meaning of a sentence, And even though you think it's an efficient sentence that has no waste or repetition in it, it very well may not be, because you are consciously or subconsciously supplying all of the associations that fill in the interstices of those words that you have actually put down on the page. Don't forget, it's only those words down on the page that matter, not any of your associations with them at all. And do we all have the exact same meaning of words in our heads? No. The philosopher Locke was very good on this. He said, every person represents to themselves something about each word, and we trust that there is a commonality in that representation. So if I say the word freedom, I trust that you and I and everyone in this room has an approximate sense of what freedom means. Will it be exact? No. There's context to take into account. There are all kinds of things to take into account. So it's a very difficult challenge. Other questions about this? Does it make sense? Am I being too abstract? You've probably all gone through this before, and you've thought about it before, but the point then is to put in the work and the dedication to overcome many of these obstacles, including the one of personal association that you have with your own writing, not to mention the fact that it's yours. And we don't like to see what we do defaced, crumpled, thrown out, struck through, canceled, rejected. But that is necessary. It's actually necessary to very good writing. So let us take a closer look now at the modes of persuasion, particularly modes of artistic persuasion. These were mentioned already in the second and third class. And let us look first at logos and spend a little time on that. If you have an element in your argument, it might be a good idea to define it. Say whether it's freedom or control or choice. How do we define things for our readers? What's a good way of defining a term or a concept? Or what have you tried?
You can give a synonym for it.
A synonym. That's a possibility.
Not usually the best.
It's not. Why is it not usually the best? I tell you, why is it not usually the best?
Because if there's two different words, then they're inherently going to mean something a little bit different
They
from each
will
other.
mean something a little bit different. If you're going to give a synonym, the synonym and the context should have greater clarity than the original word. You have to make that choice. Because one word might have 3 or 4 synonyms. Obdurate, hard, adamant, cruel. There are all kinds of words for that. So you need to be careful. So that's one way to do it. What would be another way? Yes?
You can give an etymology.
Yeah, etymology. What's an etymology? Anyone? It's not entomology. What's entomology first? Anyone? What's entomology? Study of bugs, yes, study of insects. To be distinguished from etymology. What's etymology? Olga? Yes, the origin of words. The history, the natural history of a word. It often tells you something about its use. Do you ever notice in a dictionary that very often a word has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 possible definitions? If you look in the Oxford English Dictionary, some words have 13 or 14 possible definitions. And an etymology or a natural history of the word can actually help you determine what specific meaning of the word is most pertinent and what the context should be. So there are wonderful dictionaries available online. However, I would caution you that when you use a dictionary and you find a definition that you like, one of at least what I would regard as the more deadly ways of defining a word is to begin a sentence, as you probably all have seen. Merriam-Webster defines courage as, quote, "You can do it, but I would suggest that you not use it as a primary mode of definition."